My mother-in-law showed up at our door dressed as a lawyer, claiming she had new custody papers for my kids. She didn't realize my husband's actual lawyer was already inside our house, watching the entire scene. When he opened the door and said, "Nice costume, ma'am, I'll see you in court," she ran. I was reheating last night's lasagna when I saw her car. That familiar red sedan, crawling up our street like a hunter stalking its prey. I froze, spatula in hand, watching as she parked right in front of our house. My heart sank. I knew that car. I knew who was behind the wheel. My mother-in-law, Patricia. It had been months since we'd spoken to her, months since we'd decided to cut her out of our lives for good. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. Her manipulations, her constant meddling, her obsession with controlling everything we did, we couldn't take it anymore. And when she started trying to poison our kids against us? That was the last straw. We went no contact, got a lawyer, and started preparing for the custody battle she had threatened us with. But now, seeing her car in front of our house, my chest tightened. She never showed up unannounced unless she had some nasty trick up her sleeve. I knew this wasn't a friendly visit. She was here to cause trouble. I watched as she got out of the car, and that's when I noticed it. She was wearing a navy blue pantsuit. Not her usual floral blouses or designer dresses. A crisp, formal pantsuit, complete with a white blouse underneath. Her hair was pulled back into a severe bun, not a strand out of place. She was holding a leather briefcase in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. My jaw dropped. Was she trying to look like a lawyer? What the? I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. Mark walked in, frowning. You okay? I pointed at the window. Look. He came up behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder as he followed my gaze. His whole body tensed. You've got to be kidding me. Greg, our lawyer, was sitting in the living room, papers spread out on the coffee table. We were supposed to be going over our strategy for the custody hearing next week. Now, it looked like we were going to get a preview of her tactics firsthand. Greg looked up, noticing our tense stances. What's going on? Mark's voice was tight. My mother. She's here. And, she's dressed like a damn lawyer. Greg's eyebrows shot up. He stood up, straightening his tie. Seriously? I nodded, my hands shaking. She's got papers with her. And a briefcase. Greg's face went from surprised to amused in a heartbeat. You're joking. I wish I was, Mark muttered, his jaw clenched. What's she trying to pull? I felt my stomach twist. She's here to serve us papers. She's trying to make it look official. Greg's eyes narrowed. Impersonating an attorney, that's bold. And illegal. Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth. This woman never stops. Greg moved toward the door, his face hardening. Let me handle this. I followed him, my heart racing as he swung the door open. Patricia stood there, that fake smile plastered on her face. She looked Greg up and down, clearly thrown off by his presence, but trying to keep her cool. Her eyes flicked to me, then back to Greg. Can I help you? Greg's voice was calm, almost amused. Patricia straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin. Yes, I'm here to serve new custody papers. I represent my son and his wife in a family matter. I almost laughed out loud. She was serious. She was actually standing on my porch, dressed up like some bargain bin lawyer, pretending to serve us legal papers. The audacity was almost impressive. Greg didn't even blink. Do you have a bar number, ma'am? Patricia's smile faltered. Excuse me? A bar number, Greg repeated, crossing his arms. If you're an attorney, you'll have a bar number. In this state, you're required to provide it when serving legal documents. I saw her eyes widen, just for a second, before she recovered. I'm not obligated to share that with you. Greg chuckled, shaking his head. You're not very good at this, are you? Her face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Greg leaned against the doorframe, his posture relaxed, but his eyes cold. Impersonating an attorney is a felony. Did you know that? Patricia's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. I could see the panic setting in, her eyes darting between Greg and me. She hadn't expected this. She thought she could waltz in, intimidate us, maybe scare us into dropping the custody case. But she hadn't counted on Greg being here. She definitely didn't expect to get called out on her ridiculous charade. I watched her face twist, her fake confidence crumbling. She took a step back, clutching the papers to her chest. I'm just trying to protect my grandchildren. Greg's eyes narrowed. By lying? By impersonating a lawyer? Patricia's eyes flicked to Mark, who was standing behind me, arms crossed, staring at her like she was a stranger. Mark, honey, I'm just trying to help. His face hardened. By pulling this stunt? By lying to us? Patricia's face fell. I just wanted to see my grandchildren. I stepped forward, my hands trembling. You tried to take them from us. You tried to make them think we didn't love them. You lied to them, filled their heads with poison. You crossed a line, Patricia. And now you're here, pretending to be a lawyer? You think that's going to help your case? Her face turned red, tears welling up in her eyes. I did what I thought was best. Mark shook his head. No. You did what you wanted. You never cared about what was best for them. You only cared about what was best for you. Patricia's lip trembled. I just wanted my family back. You destroyed this family. Mark's voice was cold, his eyes hard. You did that. Not us. For a moment, she just stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes wide and glistening. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she looked at me, and the mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. This is all your fault, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You turned him against me. I didn't flinch. No. You did that all by yourself. Her face twisted with rage, but before she could say another word, Greg stepped forward. I suggest you leave, before I call the police. Patricia's face went white. She looked at Greg, then at me, then at Mark. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her shoulders sagging. Without another word, she turned and marched back to her car, her heels clacking against the pavement. She fumbled with her keys, dropping them before finally getting the door open. She looked back one last time, her eyes burning with hatred, before she got in and slammed the door. The engine roared to life, and she sped off, tires screeching as she rounded the corner. I stood there, my heart pounding, my whole body trembling. It was over. At least for now. But I knew Patricia. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. We stood there, staring at the empty street long after Patricia's car was gone. My chest was tight, my hands still shaking. I looked at Mark, his face pale and eyes hollow. I knew he was hurting, knew that his own mother's betrayal was cutting him deep. But he wouldn't say it. He never did. Greg broke the silence, his voice firm. We need to report this. Impersonating an attorney is serious. It'll help our case. Mark nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging. Yeah. Do what you need to do. Greg looked at me, his eyes softening. You okay? I took a deep breath, nodding. Yeah. Just, shaken. He gave me a sympathetic look. I'll get the paperwork started. You two, take a breather. I'll be back tomorrow. After Greg left, the house felt too quiet. Too heavy. I looked up the stairs, my heart clenching as I thought of our kids. They didn't know what was happening, didn't know that their own grandmother was trying to tear our family apart. We tried so hard to shield them from the ugliness, but how much longer could we keep it up? Mark sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. I sat next to him, resting my hand on his back. You okay? He didn't look up. I can't believe she did that. I mean, I knew she was manipulative, but this? I didn't know what to say. What could I say? She was his mother. No matter how awful she was, that bond was still there, tangled and painful. She's desperate, I whispered. She's losing control, and she can't stand it. He let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, well, she's about to lose a lot more. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything pressing down on us. Eventually, we went upstairs to check on the kids. They were playing in their rooms, laughing and happy, blissfully unaware of the chaos downstairs. I leaned against the doorframe, watching them, my heart aching. I was so scared of losing them, so scared that Patricia would find some way to get her claws into our lives again. I wouldn't let that happen. I couldn't. That night, after we put the kids to bed, Mark was quiet. Distant. I could see the storm brewing behind his eyes, his jaw clenched tight. I knew he was hurting, and I knew better than to push him to talk. So I gave him space, even though it killed me inside. But then things started getting weird. It started small. Phone calls with no one on the other end. Hang-ups in the middle of the night. At first, I thought it was telemarketers or robocalls. Annoying, but harmless. But then it got worse. Calls at all hours, sometimes ringing back to back, over and over. One night, around midnight, the phone rang again. I grabbed it off the nightstand, already exhausted and on edge. Hello? Silence. Not just quiet, but a heavy, eerie silence, like someone was there, listening. My skin prickled. Who is this? Nothing. Just breathing. Soft and slow. I hung up, my heart pounding. Mark sat up, his eyes bleary. Again? I nodded, my hands shaking. This is getting creepy. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I'll call the phone company tomorrow. Maybe they can block the number. But the next day, the calls started coming to my cell phone. The first time, I didn't think much of it. Just another scam call. But then it happened again. And again. And every time, the same thing, silence. Just that slow, deliberate breathing. It was getting under my skin, making me jumpy, paranoid. I felt like I was being watched, even when I was alone. Then, the notes started showing up. The first one was on the windshield of my car. A folded piece of paper tucked under the wiper blade. I found it on my way to pick up the kids from school. I unfolded it, my heart stopping as I read the words, scrawled in messy, jagged handwriting, "You don't deserve them." My blood ran cold. This was shaking him to his core. "We need to call Greg," I said, my voice trembling. "We need to file a restraining order." But when Greg came over the next day, his face was grim. "Without proof that she left the notes, there's not much we can do. But keep them. Document everything. We'll use it in court." I felt sick. We were being stalked, threatened, and there was nothing we could do about it. I didn't sleep that night, jumping at every sound, every creak of the house settling. I kept checking the locks, peeking out the window, convinced that she was out there, lurking in the shadows. The next morning, I went out to get the mail and found another note, this one stuffed in our mailbox: "Enjoy your family while you can." My hands were shaking as I handed it to Mark. He crumpled it in his fist, his face twisting with anger. She's not going to stop. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. He was right. She wasn't going to stop. Not until she got what she wanted. That night, we were woken up by the sound of breaking glass. I shot out of bed, my heart racing. Mark grabbed the baseball bat he kept under the bed and rushed downstairs, me right behind him. The living room window was shattered, glass scattered all over the floor. But that wasn't the worst part. A brick was lying in the middle of the room, wrapped in another note: "You can't keep them from me." Mark's face went white, his hands trembling. I felt the blood drain from my face, fear twisting in my gut. She was escalating. Getting bolder. I looked at Mark, my voice shaking. "What do we do?" His jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with a rage I'd never seen before. "We fight back." I knew then that this was just the beginning. Patricia was coming for us, and she wasn't playing by the rules. But neither were we. Not anymore. We cleaned up the shattered glass that night in tense silence. Mark didn't say a word, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. I could see the storm brewing behind his eyes, his anger barely contained. I was terrified, but not just of Patricia. I was terrified of what this was doing to him. To us. We called the police, of course. They showed up, took pictures, asked questions. But when we told them who we thought did it, they just exchanged looks, their faces skeptical. "Do you have any proof?" the younger officer asked, his notepad held loosely at his side. Mark's hands curled into fists. "She's been stalking us. Leaving notes, making creepy phone calls. She showed up here, pretending to be a lawyer, for God's sake." The older officer raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any of these notes?" I pulled out the crumpled papers from the kitchen drawer, my hands trembling as I handed them over. He glanced at them, his face impassive. "These aren't signed. They don't prove she wrote them." I felt my stomach drop. But who else would do this? The officer shrugged, handing the notes back. "Could be a prank. Could be anyone. Unless you have a witness or camera footage, we can't prove it was her." I felt the room spinning, the ground shifting beneath me. "So, there's nothing you can do?" "We'll file a report for the vandalism," the younger officer said, his voice almost apologetic. "But without proof, we can't charge her." I wanted to scream. To cry. But I just stood there, my arms hanging limp at my sides as they walked out, their radios crackling as they got back in their squad car. The brick was gone, bagged as evidence. Not that it would help us. Mark didn't speak for a long time. He just stood there, staring at the broken window, his shoulders shaking. Then, he punched the wall. Hard. The sound was loud, sharp, final. I flinched, my heart pounding. I'd never seen him like this. He looked at me, his eyes wild. I won't let her take them. I won't. I swallowed, nodding. We'll find a way. We'll stop her. The next day, we bought security cameras. Mark spent hours setting them up, making sure there were no blind spots. One on the porch, one by the garage, two in the backyard. I watched him work, his movements tense, rigid. This wasn't just about protecting our house. It was about protecting our family. Our sanity. Things were quiet for a while. No phone calls, no notes. I thought maybe she'd finally backed off. Maybe she'd realized she couldn't scare us into giving up. But deep down, I knew better. This was Patricia. She didn't give up. Every creak, every shadow made my skin crawl. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she did it. How she got in without being seen. Was she working with someone? Was she paying someone to spy on us? Nothing made sense. Then, around 2 a.m., the phone rang. I jumped, my heart slamming against my ribs. Mark groaned, rolling over as I grabbed the phone, my hands shaking. Hello? Silence. Just that same slow, steady breathing. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a whisper. What do you want? The breathing stopped. And then, a voice. Low, mocking, almost playful. You can't hide them from me. I felt the phone slip from my hand, clattering to the floor. Mark shot up, eyes wide. What is it? I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stared at the phone, the dial tone buzzing faintly. She was taunting us. She was getting bolder, more twisted. The next morning, Mark decided enough was enough. He called Greg, demanding a meeting. We needed to take this to court, to get a restraining order, to do something. But when Greg showed up, he looked more stressed than I'd ever seen him. He sat us down, his face grim. I got a letter from Patricia's lawyer. Mark's face went pale. What? Greg handed him a document, his jaw tight. She's accusing you of harassment. She's claiming you've been stalking her, leaving threatening notes, calling her in the middle of the night. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? That's not true. She's the one stalking us. Greg's eyes were cold. She's flipped the script. She's accusing you of everything she's been doing. And she's got fake evidence. Mark looked at the papers, his hands shaking. How? How did she get fake evidence? Greg sighed, rubbing his temples. She claims she has voicemails. Notes with your handwriting. Witnesses who saw you near her house. I felt like I was going to be sick. She was setting us up. She was building a case against us, twisting everything to make us look like the villains. Greg looked at us, his face grim. This is serious. If she wins, she could get custody. She could get a restraining order against you. She could take your kids. I couldn't breathe. I felt the room spinning, the walls closing in. This was her plan all along. She wasn't just trying to scare us. She was trying to destroy us. Mark's face hardened, his eyes burning with rage. She wants a war? Fine. She'll get one. I knew then that this was far from over. Patricia was playing a twisted, dangerous game. And she was playing to win. Mark wasn't kidding. He was ready for war. The next morning, he called a private investigator. I didn't even know he knew one, but apparently, he did. A guy named Sam, ex-cop, quiet but sharp-eyed. The kind of guy who notices everything. If Patricia was spying on us, if she was sneaking around, Sam would find out how. Sam came over that afternoon, inspecting the cameras, checking the windows, asking a lot of questions. He listened carefully as we explained everything, the calls, the notes, the doll. I showed him the security footage that showed nothing, and he frowned, rubbing his chin. Could be a blind spot, he muttered. Or, could be someone messing with your cameras. My blood ran cold. You think she hacked them? He shrugged. It's possible. Or she's working with someone who knows how. The thought made me feel sick. Who would help her do something so twisted? Sam installed new cameras, ones that were harder to tamper with. He also put motion sensors around the house, hidden where no one would think to look. If she comes back, we'll catch her, he promised. A few days later, we got our answer. It was just after midnight when the alert went off. My phone buzzed, showing movement by the garage. I shook Mark awake, my heart racing. We crept downstairs, peeking through the window. There, under the dim light of the street lamp, was Patricia. She was crouched by the garage door, fiddling with something. I zoomed in on the camera feed, my jaw dropping as I saw what she was doing, taping another note to the door. But she wasn't alone. Standing a few feet behind her was a man. Tall, muscular, with a beanie pulled low over his face. I recognized him immediately, Darren. Patricia's handyman. The guy who did odd jobs around her house. No wonder the cameras never caught anything. Darren knew his way around security systems. He must have been disabling them for her, helping her sneak in and out without a trace. Mark's face turned red with anger. That's how she did it. She paid him to help her. I grabbed his arm, my voice trembling. We need to call the police. Right now. He didn't argue. This time, we had proof. The police arrived fast, catching Patricia and Darren before they could leave. Patricia tried to lie, tried to cry her way out of it, but the camera footage didn't lie. Neither did the note, which read, "They belong with me." It was over. They were caught red-handed. I watched from the window as they put Patricia in handcuffs, her face twisted with rage as she screamed at us. This isn't over. I'll get them back. The officer slammed the car door, cutting her off. I felt a wave of relief so powerful that my knees nearly buckled. It was over. Finally, it was over. Or so I thought. A few days later, Greg called us into his office. His face was tense, his mouth set in a hard line. We have a problem. Mark and I exchanged worried looks. What now? Greg handed us a stack of papers, his jaw tight. Patricia's lawyer is pushing forward with the harassment case. She claims you set her up. That you planted the cameras and the notes to make her look guilty. I felt my stomach drop. What? How? We have footage. We have proof. Greg nodded. I know. But she's claiming it was doctored. And Darren's backing her up. I felt like the floor was ripped out from under me. He's lying for her? Greg's eyes were dark. She's paying him off. Probably promised him a big payday if they win. I felt sick. Patricia was behind bars, but she was still fighting, still trying to ruin us. I looked at Mark, his face pale, his fists clenched. She won't stop, he whispered. She'll never stop. Greg leaned back, his eyes narrowing. There's one more thing. Patricia's lawyer, she's dirty. She's known for playing dirty. Bribing witnesses, forging evidence. She'll do anything to win. I felt my blood boil. This wasn't just about custody. This was about destroying us, ruining our lives out of spite. And Patricia was willing to break every law to do it. Greg's eyes gleamed with determination. But two can play at that game. If she wants to fight dirty, we'll fight smart. That's when the real battle began. Greg and Sam teamed up, digging into every corner of Patricia's life. They found everything, fake documents, secret bank accounts, even recordings of her threatening to ruin us. But the biggest twist came when Sam dug into Darren's past. He found proof that Darren had been paid off, not just by Patricia, but by her lawyer, too. They were working together, setting us up from the start. Fake witnesses, false reports, even tampering with evidence. It was all planned, all orchestrated by Patricia and her crooked lawyer. We brought everything to court. Every recording, every document, every piece of evidence. Greg was relentless, tearing apart their lies, piece by piece. Darren crumbled on the stand, admitting everything under oath. Patricia's lawyer tried to fight back, but the evidence was too strong. In the end, the judge ruled in our favor. Patricia's harassment claims were dismissed. Our restraining order was granted, permanent and ironclad. And then the real justice came down. Patricia was charged with stalking, harassment, and conspiracy. Darren was charged with aiding and abetting. And Patricia's lawyer? Disbarred and arrested for fraud and evidence tampering. She was facing years behind bars. I sat in that courtroom, holding Mark's hand as the verdicts were read, feeling a weight lift off my chest. It was over. Really, truly over. As we walked out of the courthouse, Mark squeezed my hand, his eyes red but his smile genuine. We did it. We protected our family. I felt tears sting my eyes, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over me. Yeah. We did. We drove home that day, the sun shining bright, the air feeling lighter, cleaner. For the first time in months, I felt safe. I looked at our house, standing tall and strong, our kids' laughter drifting through the open window. We were okay. We were together. And no one could take that from us. Justice was served. And Patricia? She was finally out of our lives. For good.